What if James Bradbury doesn't get flagged during the Super Bowl? What if the Eagles sign Peyton Manning? What if Howie Roseman gets fired instead of moved to the other side of the building? We are talking about all these alternate timelines with Les Bowen and Zach Berman coming up next on the PHLY Eagles podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PHLY Eagles podcast, a Monday high noon, starting off the week in rare form. We have an exciting show today, joined, as you can see if you're watching, in the middle by Les Bowen as well as Zach Berman. Les, you and Julia, actually, I don't know if you know this, both in attendance at the Phillies game in London.
I did not see Julia there. I'm sorry.
Julia, did you see Les?
I did not.
Okay.
Wow, too bad.
I was way
how
out
was
in
your
the
time
outfield.
abroad?
It was great. It was a really wonderful trip. I love London. I enjoyed the games. We went to Edinburgh on the train. That was cool. Saw a lot of sheep.
I love Edinburgh.
Yeah.
When my wife and I did a then girlfriend like a night, a long backpacking through Europe trip a long time ago, we had gone to like some mediocre castle in outside Dublin first, and we're like, this is not a castle. Then you get to Edinburgh, and like, oh,
There's a castle.
there's a
Yep.
proper castle.
Yep,
There is,
yep.
and the city is built around it. Beautiful city.
My favorite part of the castle history is when the Jacobites were gonna, they had the army. They were all ready. It was like it almost sounds like something Monty Python, but it was actually true. This was 400 years ago. They stormed the castle, and then they realized that the ladders they built were way too short. Run away, run away.
Zach, how are you? How was your weekend?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here. Interested to hear more about that backpacking trip. Can say I had a great meal in London with Les. The last time I was in London, after the Eagles game, I can imagine now we're in this world-class city. Les is enjoying London, and he's being peppered by me with questions about, do you think Jordan Matthews is legit right now? Because that's basically, that was the type of dinner companion I was.
I thought it was great.
After that Eagles-Jags game back in 2018.
Yes, I believe Jason Kelce missed a snap in that game because he got kicked in the nuts. Remember that?
Vaguely. Yes.
I remember that's what I wrote about. But yeah,
That's what you wrote about. Okay, yeah.
It was a good game. Josh Adams running rampant. They had a bad turf, right? They had to change
Bad
cleats.
turf. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
But cool venue. Wembley.
Wembley.
Yeah.
All right, we got a lot to get to, and I feel like this is a show that may go over because there's
right.
so much to talk about here. The conceit of the episode today, Les, is what-ifs over recent Eagles history. Now, there are so many that we have to confine it a little bit, so we're going to try to keep it to the time that we have covered the team. And I think the best way to go about this is a little bit chronologically. So maybe we'll bounce around. Everybody give one from the Andy Reid era, the Chip era, the Doug era, the Sirianni era, and then maybe some leftovers at the end. And now there are all kinds of ways to go about this, right? You could talk about game situations. You could talk about coaching decisions and personnel decisions, draft decisions. To me, and we'll get to these, but the most interesting ones to me are the ones where like we know that the Eagles wanted to do something and were not able to do it.
Yeah.
And so like what would have happened had they gotten their druthers, if you will. But let's go through it. Zach, do you want to start with your Andy Reid what if that you'd like to unpack?
Sure. Let's start with one we've discussed over the years, which was, what if Russell Wilson was the third round pick in 2012? And this is something that in that building they speak frequently about, that they wanted Russell Wilson. They thought Russell Wilson was going to be there. Of course, Seattle takes him. The Eagles end up with Nick Foles. But what if Russell Wilson was the pick in 2012?
Do you think they would have had? What if they had taken him in the second round? Is that like should they have done that?
With the
or it's
Vinny
more
Curry
just
pick,
like they
yes.
got what they wanted and they got Vinny Curry in the second and Russell Wilson. Because
Yeah.
it's about what 10 picks later.
Yeah, they were. I think it was 12 picks, and they were
Okay.
convinced that Russell was going to be there. And in the draft room, they were saying he's going to be there in the third round.
I remember Howie actually calling, was it John Schneider, I guess, and congratulating him for doing that because he really didn't think anybody was going to.
Yeah, I don't know if Jeffrey Lurie had the same like congratulatory feeling after that one.
They would have been a really good team, I think. They drafted Nick instead, and Nick actually had a hell of a run in 2013, but it didn't last.
And that was under Chip.
Yeah, that was under Chip.
Does Andy keep his job?
Yeah, that's a real good question.
So let's play this out a little bit. 2012 is the year that they go 4-12 and Andy gets fired. If they have Russell Wilson, presumably he gets on the field at some point as a rookie. Probably doesn't win the job right away like he did in Seattle, but shows enough that Andy sticks around. This is
where what ifs are problematic to me.
Yes.
Because I do believe in the butterfly effect.
I agree.
Russell Wilson was very, very successful with a great defense and a great running game in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
But he had LaShawn McCoy. I mean, Juan Castillo's defense was not.
Didn't have a great defense.
Did not have a great defense.
I don't know. It probably would have worked out real well, but I'm not certain that it would have. Russell Wilson has shown, particularly in recent years, that he's not, Peyton Manning or Drew Brees or Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he's a very good quarterback. It would have been very different, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think.
How would his personality have gone over here?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And would it have turned out to be different if he had Andy Reid, on him instead of Pete Carroll, right?
I think Andy keeps the job.
I think Andy keeps the job too, at least for a year.
Sure.
Right.
Who knows Andy's going to have to replace Juan Castillo after that year, presumably, right? And we can get to that as one of the possible what ifs.
That's the thing. Andy needed the reset.
I think he
really did, and he changed a lot of stuff. I'm not sure Andy would have done that here.
But at the same time, Andy Reid is a good quarterback developer, right?
And
so if he has Russell Wilson as opposed to Pete Carroll developing, maybe Russell Wilson becomes an even better player under Andy Reid.
Yeah. Right? Also, Russell Wilson's probably a better fit in Chip's offense. And so if Andy does go in 2013, Chip takes over, it's very clear who the quarterback is, right? They turn toward Russell Wilson, and the Chip era might turn out differently as well.
I'm trying to think of like personality clashes. Russell Wilson, Deshaun Jackson does not seem like the happiest marriage to me.
You don't think so?
Might not
necessarily.
Who do you think Chip would side with on that personality clash?
I think you probably know the answer to that.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, how about you, Les? What's top of mind for you?
Oh, wow. Well, I was saying before we got on that when I think of the what ifs, I tend to think of games more than huge meta type decisions. There are two things that really stick in my mind, both from the Andy Reid era. The very first year I covered the Eagles was 2002. They should have beaten Tampa Bay in that infamous playoff game that closed the vet for football. They had beaten Tampa during the regular season handily. In that era, defense and running the ball were still a good way to go, and they had done it that way. And Andy didn't want to do it that way in the NFC Championship game, even though Donovan McNabb was 1 week back from a long absence from a fractured ankle. So they got a lead and then tried to throw it, and a lot of things, John Gruden just really, I remember Hugh Douglas telling me that they were passing from a 2 tight end set. So Hugh Douglas was on the bench because Jim Johnson thought 2 tight end set, we need the running guys in there, and Hugh had to go to Jim Johnson and say, they're throwing from the 2 tight end set because you take me out. I mean, the things, they had a better team. They had the better team. And to really put the cherry on top, the Super Bowl was Tampa against the worst team of my era of covering Super Bowls, the Raiders. Yeah. A Raiders team that was like 150-year-old Jerry Rice, 120-year-old Rich Gannon. How the hell they got to the Super Bowl, I have no idea.
Aaron Robbins was in Mexico.
They were horrible. They were just, there was no way the Eagles would lose to that team. And how much would have been different if the Eagles had won the Super Bowl in February 2003? You know,
it's like the meme of like this is what Philadelphia would look like if they had won the Super Bowl in 2002.
So if I can follow up there, how do they? Let's say they do win the Super Bowl, then do they operate differently in those following years? Do they not feel the urgency to go after T.O.?
Right. Oh no, I don't think they would. No.
They're saying they've won one.
Yeah.
This is working. This is the personnel you're doing it with. Yes, and they opened the stadium the next year.
Yeah.
With a Super Bowl banner as the champions. Yeah.
It makes everything different, I think.
Yeah. Well, and it's like you talked about the other day, Zach, in the Cole Hamels, Zach Greinke conversation, right? You win that Super Bowl. For that group, everything changes. They're always the team, right? Yeah. And so, Andy Reid doesn't have all the years of the hand wringing over and can he get it done and all that stuff.
And it's not a far-fetched one. It's not like a lot of people talk about that Alshon Jeffrey catch,
and we can get to that.
That team, they weren't winning any Super Bowls.
Let's just do that one. Yeah, but because that one is it is a little silly to me.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
The ball, he should catch the ball. But they're at like the 21-yard line.
Right.
They still have to score a touchdown. And even if they do score a touchdown, the Saints can come back and kick a field goal. And even if they win that game, like that team had already way overachieved.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about they're giving 10 carries to Wendell Smallwood, and the defense is like Trey Sullivan is playing safety. Like that team had already overachieved.
And
Nick
they would have lost. Was not playing the way he played.
No, he threw for 200 yards in that game.
They should have lost the opening week. A kicker hits an upright, and I don't go with that one at all.
Yeah, they were on the 19-yard line. There was 2 minutes to go. So like Bo said, they still need to drive and score. They only scored 2 touchdowns in that game.
Right.
There's no sense that or there's no reason to be convinced they score a touchdown there. And even if they do score a touchdown, Drew Brees needs a minute to go get a field goal, which is certainly conceivable. So that's one of those that I think the Eagles have kind of built that myth up. You've heard Howie Roseman say we're a drop we're a drop pass away from winning a second one, and people forget they were also 2 games away, right? So then they would have to go to LA, right?
Beat the Rams.
So I'm not buying that one.
Yeah, come on.
But I did have one other one real quick. I don't want to dominate the discussion here, but my other one that I was looking at the game book to refresh my memory before we came on. 2010 playoffs.
Yes. This is a very good one.
44 seconds left. 1st and 10 on the Green Bay 27. Michael Vick throws up a jump ball in the end zone for fifth-round rookie, Riley Cooper. And Tramon Williams intercepts, and the Eagles lose, and the Packers go on to win the Super Bowl. Now,
this is a very interesting one to unpack.
You have like 4 plays left. And the overriding thing to me of this was, so this was the year of redemption for Michael Vick.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
He played wonderfully. There was a lot of the narrative was about how he had put aside his ridiculous gambling, doing crazy things, and he was playing within a structure, and he was doing things the right way. And when we talked to him after the game, his excuse was, well, I just wanted to try to make something happen. I remember that very, very well because it was all I could do to keep from yelling out, you had 44 seconds, it was 1st down, you didn't need to make something happen. I have to think, since the Packers won the Super Bowl, that the Eagles might have been capable of winning that Super Bowl.
It's certainly capable. And I remember going into that game, it felt like these were the 2 best teams in the NFC at the time. I remember thinking, working for the team, that if they had won that game, they had a very good chance to win the Super Bowl. Obviously, they had the miracle at the New Meadowlands that year. Like, the offense was interesting by all the advanced stats. They were one of the best, 5 or so teams in the league. That game in particular has a lot of what-ifs. They lost by 5. This is the famous David Akers misses 2 field goals.
Yeah.
Andy gives the we can all count. And that was, maybe a little uncouth on Andy's part, but that's a big deal. They had a 2-point conversion to tie it, and Brent Selleck steps out of bounds before catching what would have been the 2-point conversion. So, or not to tie it, but if they had
I didn't even remember
that. Kicked
the
field goal to tie the game at the end there. They don't have to throw it up to Riley Cooper. You could argue that Riley Cooper should have knocked that ball down.
Riley just kind of stood there and watched it. I remember
he was
that
not a good
real
play,
well.
but in his defense, he was a
But
fifth-round
why would
rookie,
you
right?
throw a Hail Mary to a 5th-round rookie on 1st and 10
Right.
from the 20? I'm sure he was like, what the hell?
Deshaun gets hurt in the beginning of this game and
Yeah.
then comes back in the second half and makes an impact. It was fun, watching the highlights. I was doing that this morning. If they win that game, they then probably go to
Atlanta.
Or
no,
they
actually,
go to
no.
Chicago.
They go to Chicago
They
because
go-
Eagles were the 3
Right.
seed.
They go to Chicago
Yep.
and they
Rex
play a
Gross.
team that was playing over its skis by the advanced stats. This is a Jay Cutler team. I think I would have
Oh, it's a
expected
Jay Cutler
them
team. Okay.
to win that game. And then if they win that, they either go to Atlanta or play a bad Seahawks team at home, presumably at Atlanta. Could have won that game, but it's still a long way to get to.
Oh, yeah, it is. It is.
To actually get to
But
the,
it
to
was
winning the
right
Super Bowl.
there. I mean, the game was right there. to
And
me.
you also wonder if they win that game, does Aaron Rodgers get chastened a little bit? Maybe doesn't develop brain worms over the course of the next decade.
That's the only Super Bowl he ever won.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: as I wasn't there at the time. If they win that game, does Sean McDermott stay the defensive coordinator?
I think
Oh,
probably
I think so, yeah.
Interesting.
That's the other thing
Because he
that
was
this
a high
leads to.
level. They switched to Juan Castillo there, and that was a major inflection point.
I think
in the
that's a
organization.
huge inflection point because they didn't have to
Yes,
fire Sean
exactly.
McDermott.
They did not. They had a few veteran players who mocked him. Asante Samuel,
Yes.
mostly, who just thought the guy, who's this little guy who played at William and Mary? I don't need to do what he tells me, But their metrics weren't bad. It wasn't like they had a
Sure.
terrible defense or
No.
anything. There were just a few players that wouldn't accept him as Jim Johnson's successor. How many more years were those players around? Not many.
And what this leads to is the Juan thing, right? Which
was a disaster.
Of course, it was a disaster. Now, Andy wanted to try to lure Monty Kiffin originally, right? Who was coaching with his son at USC. If he's the defensive coordinator, presumably they're a little bit better in 2011. You don't have the disaster of the dream team. Other defensive coordinators who were hired that cycle include Dennis Allen, which would have been interesting.
Who they
Rob
liked.
Ryan, right?
He reached out to Rob Ryan as well.
Now, my understanding there, and you guys were there. I wasn't covering the team at the time. Is that they wanted Jim Washburn. They hired Jim Washburn, and so they needed a defensive coordinator,
somebody who would work with Jim
pair
Washburn,
with
which
Washburn's
is
defensive line.
how you do it that way. I have no idea. Then that's why I think Andy needed a reset, is because he made so many really bizarre decisions.
Part of the reason to move Juan was because it meant that you could also get Howard Mudd. It started with Washburn.
Right.
And it's we could pair Washburn and his buddy Mudd.
Yep.
But we got to keep Juan, so let's demote him to defensive coordinator.
Howard Mudd, one of the a Hall of Fame coach, but that didn't work out well either. He wasn't around half the time.
If Juan's the offensive coordinator, or the offensive line coach, they're probably not drafting Jason Kelsey.
That's true.
Right.
All of these.
I
we
get
talked
what
about the
Jackson.
butterfly
Yeah.
effect.
Yeah.
It all follows.
Very good
around.
point. Very good point.
So that was the one that I would have talked about. The last one from that era, the end of the Andy Reid time is, and this is a little bit more far fetched, and I think not my kind of favorite, where it's something that was close to happening, but they were one of the teams pursuing Peyton Manning, sort of undercover in 2012. Now Peyton didn't really want to come to the NFC East. He didn't want to have to play against Eli, so it probably wasn't going to happen. But they were making every effort. They were doing, there's a story of Dom is giving Peyton Manning a virtual tour of the NovaCare complex on his iPad because Peyton wouldn't even come to Philadelphia. But if Peyton comes at that stage of his career, Andy certainly stays, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's one where the Eagles want it, and as you said, and Peyton Manning wasn't considering it. From what I understand, Peyton really wanted to stay in the AFC as well, not just the NFC East, not just avoiding the NFC East with Eli there, but he's a maniacal, student of the game.
Right.
He knew the teams in the AFC.
Yes.
So he was considering Tennessee at the time. He was considering briefly the New York Jets. He was considering, but I think the Broncos and John Elway there was certainly the draw. But you're right. I mean, I do know during that period, the Eagles were looking at a number of big name quarterbacks, and even in the draft, one thing I also know is they've now this isn't like a bold take, but they had a really high grade on Andrew Luck. They tried maniacally to trade up that year. Obviously, Indianapolis wasn't moving off that pick, but I think they were hoping that the Colts would bring Peyton back,
right,
and they could trade for the number one pick.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, another what if, Zach, is what if instead of putting your money in a big bank, you put it in a credit union like TrueMark Financial Credit Union? Because when you join a credit union like TrueMark Financial, you become part owner, which means the profits come back to you instead of going to the shareholders. We're talking better rates, lower fees, a better return on savings, and more flexible options with all the same digital tools and tech to make our lives easier. TrueMark has local roots, headquartered where Zach and Julia went to high school in Fort Washington, with 24 branches in the Philly area. They serve our community and our people right here at home. Becoming a member of a credit union has so many benefits over being a customer at a bank. It's a total no-brainer. Head over to truemark.com/PHLY to learn more or to find a branch near you. That's truemark.com/PHLY, federally insured by the NCUA.
Picking up dinner last night at a salad place, and the drinks that they have to offer, they're not offering, your old-fashioned sugary sodas. You know what they're offering? They're offering Olipop, because they know that if you want a new kind of soda with only 2 to 5 grams of sugar and 9 grams of fiber per can, you're turning to the world's first functional soda with a classic soda taste and the benefits of plant-based fiber, prebiotics, and other botanical ingredients to support gut health. You don't have to go to the salad shop, though, to get Olipop. You can also go to Wawa, because it couldn't be more of a match made in heaven. A delicious, healthy drink meets a convenience store both adored by a cult following. The 2 flavors debuting in Wawa are classic root beer and strawberry vanilla, but you can also go online and get other great flavors like vintage cola, orange squeeze, classic grape, strawberry vanilla. I mentioned strawberry vanilla, cream soda, and cherry cola. They also have a Dr. Goodwin and a lemon lime flavor. Just use the code PHLY for 20% off your next order. The discount only applies to one-time orders, not to subscription orders. Olipop is sold online, drinkolipop.com, and on Amazon, and it's available in almost 30,000 retailers nationwide, including Wawa, Target, Sprouts, Wegmans, ShopRite, and GoPuff, as well as the salad place I went to last night.
I do want to keep things moving and move on to the chip era, but I have one other question for you, Les, having been there, and I know this was on your list, Zach. If Kevin Kolb never gets hurt in week 1 of the 2010 season, how do you feel like the Kevin Kolb Eagles quarterback era would have gone were he not plagued by concussions?
That's a good question. They kind of sold me on their investment in Kevin. I was pretty confident that they wanted Kevin Kolb to be the quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had some attributes that could have made him successful. But the problem with Kevin Kolb was he was tall, but he was built very he had one of the most slender builds of any quarterback I ever covered. And one thing that happened with him, and everybody knows this, he got hit a few times and got a concussion or two and started, instead of moving laterally, he would go backwards in the pocket. And he didn't have a great arm. So, going backwards in the pocket is never a good idea because it's hard to even get the ball back to the line of scrimmage so that you're not grounding. There's no, you don't gain anything out of that except the chance to lose a whole bunch of yardage. But B, if you can't really zip the ball, you're putting yourself in a ridiculous hole. So I just don't think I think Kevin was always going to get concussions, and I think his career was always going to work out like it did. Although he was, kind of a good game manager type quarterback, a smart guy. I think it would have taken a lot longer maybe if he hadn't gotten hurt in that opener against, I guess it was Green Bay. So much Green Bay in the what-if department. You could argue that the one we were talking about a minute ago was karma getting them back for 4th and 26.
There you go.
But
my one quick follow up on the Kolb thing, because you were there. from what I understand, and this might be revisionist history from players, that they saw during that summer that Vic was on the verge of being special.
Right.
Do you think it was inevitable that Vic was taking over? Or do you think had Cobb not gotten hurt, they would have done everything they could to keep Cobb as the starter?
I think they were going to be very reluctant to move on from Kevin Cobb because Andy had drafted him and groomed him for a couple years, and they liked him a lot, and they were not sure about Michael Vick. The first year that Vic came back from prison, he really couldn't do much of anything but run around.
Yes.
I mean, he was so rusty and so out of sync. So I think it took the coaching staff a lot longer. I think the players, especially the black players, a lot of them grew up admiring Michael Vick. And they were on board with this. The Atlanta Michael Vick, was a hero to them.
Sure.
To Andy, he was a guy they could always beat when they needed to because he didn't see this and he didn't see that, and you just had to keep him in the pocket. It was a different mindset as to who Michael Vick was. But I do think by the end of the season, certainly they would have ended up with Michael Vick.
We like to say the players know, right? The players always know.
Yes.
And this happens a lot where there's even like a Jalen Hurts, Carson Wentz to this.
Yeah.
Where at some point, sometimes the players know sooner than the coaches are willing to admit. I'm a bit of a Kevin Cobb truther, maybe against the evidence, but so my start with the team is that 2009 season when they signed Michael Vick, and Kevin Cobb had the 2 games in place of an injured Donovan McNabb, looked very good in those 2 games. And so it's hard to say if he never got injured because he does have that style that maybe was lending itself to getting injured. I believed in Kevin Cobb. I thought that under Andy Reid, he could have been a top 15 quarterback and a playoff caliber quarterback.
Right.
However, once they brought in Vic, I do think the writing was on the wall for him eventuis. So,
and Vic had that amazing arm. I've just never seen anything like that whip.
The flick of the wrist.
His career was really a tragedy. I mean, he could have been he could have been just so he could have been Mahomes, I mean, but he wasn't.
All right, Zach, your boy Chip Kelly comes in 2013. What is the what if that hangs over that era in your mind?
Yeah, I'm curious. Your perspective here, Les, is the Eagles were interested in Marcus Mariota.
Yep.
Chip Kelly gave the analogy of your house shopping in a neighborhood where the houses are beyond your price point, so it never gets to that point. But there is kind of an understanding that the Eagles were prepared to offer a huge haul that included multiple picks, Fletcher Cox, Michael Kendricks, right?
That would have been a disaster.
Yeah, so now the flip side is that Marcus Mariota was kind of Chip's ideal quarterback, right? So what if Tennessee said, man, this is too good a deal to pass up, right? I know we have the number 2 pick and we have a need at quarterback, but we have Kerry Collins, and now you get Fletcher Cox and Michael Kendricks and a first-round pick and a second-round pick and a first-round pick next year. What would have happened for the Eagles in those subsequent years with Marcus Mariota and Chip Kelly?
Oh, that would have. I think Chip would have been done even sooner than he was.
Do you think they would have been more reluctant to move on because it's like, here's your guy?
Yeah. I think he would have had a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Okay, there's that aspect to it. But Mariota was never great. He and Jameis Winston were so disappointing. It was one of those things where every year there's got to be 2 or 3 franchise quarterbacks in the draft. Sometimes there aren't, and there weren't. I mean, neither one of those guys was what he was billed to be coming into the league, and that was a blind spot Chip had. None of his Oregon players were of that era as much publicity as they got. Who was the pass rusher, the 3rd overall pick?
Deion Jordan.
Yeah. Deion Jordan, who's Deion Jordan? I mean,
it's not Lane Johnson.
Over and over again. The only Oregon player I can remember of the Chip era that the Eagles ended up with, and they only had him very briefly, was Jordan Poyer, whom they drafted in the 7th round.
State.
Who was good. It was Oregon State.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
Casey Matthews was the...
Chip knew him well
but
because
Casey Matthews
of...
wasn't even a Chip
because
pick.
of...
That was an Andy pick.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying who they drafted from that era.
Yeah.
From
Well,
when Chip
Taylor
was there.
Hart.
Yeah, Taylor
No,
Hart.
no, I'm saying before Chip was there.
Yeah.
Well, he's not.
Is
That's
that
not.
what you're
he's
referring
not
to?
I was
talking
just
about that.
Oregon guys in general of that
okay.
era
Yeah.
just weren't.
Yeah,
great.
the, actually,
they were great college players, but
on the LaShawn McCoy, Deshaun Jackson podcast,
they're talking about
they
Jeff
were joking
Mail.
about Jeff Mail. Like,
yeah,
who's this guy?
you're right.
like they thought he was just like a camp body, and all of a sudden he's
Right.
on the team. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
There you go.
So yeah, I don't. Marcus Mariota, that would have made things even worse than they ended up, I think.
I think obviously the great macro what if of this era is the fissure between Chip and Howie.
Yes.
And I guess the question is, was that always destined to happen? If the story goes that the reason that Chip lost faith in Howie was because of that Marcus Smith draft when there were 6 guys on their board they wanted
Right.
with 6 picks
They
to go,
thought
and
they were
Howie
gonna
was
get one of
preaching
them.
patience. We're
Yep.
going to get one. Somebody's going to take somebody off this board. They go boom, 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 boom. And from that point on, Chip sort of didn't trust Howie anymore. So if they do get, Clinton Dix or whoever it is, do they work together for a longer period of time? And does
question.
eventually Howie earn Chip's trust and can build him a roster where they're not, signing DeMarco Murray and doing these stupid things?
Or trading LaShawn McCoy.
The flip side is, what if Jeffrey Lurie just sides with Chip Kelly and instead of reassigning Howie to the other side of the building, just decides, Howie, I love you, but I'm moving on. Like we need a new proper GM in here, and good luck in your future endeavors.
I'll open up a subhead under that second heading. We know Howie talked to other teams, at least 1 or 2 other teams during that time that he was in exile.
Right.
What if he had actually gotten a job somewhere else?
Yeah.
Jeffrey wouldn't have had to do anything differently, and Howie would have still been gone. That would have changed everything, I think.
Which is probably a better what if, because I actually don't think that Jeffrey ever really considered firing Howie.
Yeah.
So if he got that job, that would have been more likely.
The basic problem with Howie and Chip, I think Howie is a little bit different guy than he was 10 years ago. I think there was a lot written and there's been a lot said. Howie was a very difficult person when he first became GM. He was not an easy person to be around or work for. I had a lot of people tell me, I couldn't stand to be around this guy. He was really, every day was, he wanted to reinvent the wheel every day. What are we doing? What are we not doing? It was just exhausting to work with him. He didn't have a lot of respect for other people. And Chip was kind of the same way. Mm-hmm. So I just don't think they were ever destined to really
I tend to agree with that.
But had that draft certainly gave Chip the weapon to convince Jeffrey, let me try my hand at personnel. Had they gotten I don't think Jeffrey would have done that for Chip otherwise, because I think Jeffrey knew by then that coaches don't necessarily, the coach as GM isn't a great model for most teams. Coaches are coaches. I know Chip felt right away that he knew as much as the personnel people, because in the 2013 draft, he knew that Odell Beckham was the best player.
Yes, of course.
And, and that other teams didn't know that. So therefore, he was a personnel genius, which is just like you or me saying, well, I had Jason Kelsey as a pretty good player coming out. So therefore, I'm,
Yeah, I think when I look back at that time, from Howie's perspective, had the Eagles been good in 2015, he would not have stayed for a second year of that. I think that first year was kind of like, all right, let's see if this works.
This was the sink or swim.
Exactly. Right. Let's see if this works with Chip. But had they gone 10-6 again, and Chip got another year, I don't think Howie would have been 2 years out of the game.
Yeah. You're probably right.
So Howie might have,
very good point.
Les said, Howie might have left on his own volition, whether it's another team, whether it's a media gig, something like that. Like I don't think he would have been in that side office 2 years in a row.
And this is then you talk about the butterfly effect and like the really divergent paths, because even if that had happened, if Howie leaves, I don't think that Chip is a long-standing coach. So then all of a sudden it's a brand new era. Who do they hire?
Huge era.
Who's the GM?
Yeah.
Wow.
They could have gone in a completely different way.
But I think I think Chip had his doubts, for lack of a better term, from the jump. I think he wanted his own guy in there.
Yeah.
I think Jeffrey believed with 2 10-win seasons that Chip was worth doubling down on at that point.
But I think that he was also appropriately skeptical. I mean, he kept Howie around for a reason.
Definitely
I think he was giving him enough rope to hang himself with.
Definitely
And that actually, every time I think about that aspect of it, I think about where we are right now with Nick Sirianni coming back after this horrible collapse with these 2 coordinators and the quarterback saying that 95% of the offense is different. And apparently the Howard Eskin pushed back against that. We all think Howard talks to management and the coaches. Are we in a similar situation today with Jeffrey sort of, Nick, let's see if this works, which is what I think he kind of did with Chip, was like he kind of knew
I think
in the back of his mind that there was a good chance that this wasn't the answer.
I think it's an appropriate thing to circle back on. I think the difference is, as opposed to empowering Chip, I think he has sort of neutered Nick.
Yeah.
I don't think that Nick's idea was to bring in Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. I think that was, Jeffrey and Howie's idea. If anything, the guy who's being like given the rope to maybe hang himself, I think you could argue that that's Jalen.
Oh yeah,
like, This is like, okay, here's everything you should need, Jalen.
Yeah.
If you can't do it now, then maybe we're having a different conversation.
Yeah.
But just to put a bow on this too, I think when Jeffrey looks back at that time, I think his perspective is that he probably wishes he acted sooner on the interpersonal dynamics of that.
Yeah.
That it was because, and I think you reported this well at the time, Les, that Jeffrey was a little more hands off back then.
Yes.
He was. and it was kind of known at the time,
taking his team back,
that there was something simmering, with the interpersonal dynamic. So
what if Chip Kelly had the temerity to say hello to people as he walked by in the hallway?
No, but there's this famous story with the Sixers, and again, I don't cover the Sixers, but Pat Croce basically like sitting Larry Brown and Allen Iverson down and say, you guys got to work this out, right?
Yeah.
So it's
could Jeffrey have done that with Howie
or
Chip? Yeah.
Maybe he was doing that, but he should have been more forceful about this. Like, Howie's not going anywhere, and you're not going anywhere, so you guys got to work this out. Yeah,
that's tremendous. Yeah.
Good conversation brought to you by BetParx Sportsbook and the BetParx Sportsbook app. You can get in the zone with the BetParx Sportsbook app. The money is in the moments. We got Game 7 of the NHL Finals coming up tonight. You watching that, Les?
I want to. I'm really pulling hard for Edmonton. I'd really love to see Canada get the Stanley Cup, and I'm just so afraid that I'm going to be. I might just sort of check in on it, and then if Edmonton's ahead, I'll watch. I'm really kind of. As a fan, I'm kind of a wuss. I don't like to be crushed.
Well, and there's nothing with more pressure than Game 7 of a hockey finals. Nothing more tense than that. Well, if you want to make it extra tense, you can get a little hooch on the BetParx Sportsbook app. You can win big with all-day action. Win your first $10 bet and earn $125 in sports bonus bets. You play for fun. You love to win. You bet. Download the app and play along with us. Must be 21 or older. Please gamble responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Look, I believe in journalism, and this disclosure is important. I'm not an objective source with this, but I've been going to allphly.com frequently over the past 10 months, but especially these past few days, because I think our coverage of the NBA draft and the NHL draft is outstanding.
Yes.
And if you want to know everything from Bub Carrington in the NBA draft to Berkeley Catton in the NHL draft,
wow, how about that?
You got to read our coverage. It's in depth on prospects. It's in depth on strategy. And you can read Les Bowen's outstanding coverage too on the Eagles by being a diehard member on PHLY. But also, in addition to being a diehard member, we have great events, including July 13th, the PHLY first annual Liberty Open at Valley Brook Country Club in Blackwood, New Jersey. It's a scramble format. You can sign up as a single foursome, or you can sponsor a hole. There's gifts. There's a Taste of Philly dinner. And you can find all our events on allphly.com. We have NHL draft event. We have the Sixers draft event coming up. The Sixers one is at Garage North in Fishtown. The Flyers one is at Chickies and Pete's with Broad Street Hockey, breaking down the entire NHL draft. You can find all of this on allphly.com. So head over to allphly.com now and join the best sports fans in the city.
I have a couple things here. First of all, outside of the discussion, you said from Bub to Berkeley, right?
Yes.
Do you guys share my distaste for a list of names being alphabetized by first name as opposed to last name?
I do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hate that.
Yes, I do too.
Really makes me angry.
Yes.
It's so unserious.
Yes.
What are we doing?
But I find for alliteration purposes, the first name's better.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that as scribes you share my pet peeve there.
Yes.
Okay. Second question. Before we get to the Doug era, do you think that Howie Roseman is as good today as a general manager if he hadn't experienced that divorce with Joe?
He needed that. He talked a lot when he first came back about having spent the year analyzing other ways of managing and thinking about how he presented himself. And a little bit of that is...
I think a little bit of that is myth-making.
Like
he had to do something with his time.
I think
it's more about the chastened ego a little bit.
Yeah.
And, he talks about he goes up and trades to get the second pick for Carson because he never got himself a quarterback. I think what it was more like, I might only get one shot at this.
Exactly.
I'm going to be much more risk tolerant.
Right.
Yeah, I think his perspective at that point is, I lost my job before, right? So it's like, you get the second chance. I'm going to do it my way, right? I'm not, and perhaps he's more emboldened then to do it his way. But I think his perspective was, if he's going to fail this time, it's going to be entirely because of him, and it's not going to be because of other factors like picking something for a coach or something like that.
And having gone through all that, I think that might have helped him. The most impressive thing he's done to me as a general manager is dig himself out of the Carson Wentz mess after the 2020 season and reset. Because I really thought the coach lost his job over Carson Wentz not turning out like they thought. It was the GM that made the trade. They had a bad team, and the defense was old, and they didn't have a quarterback. And I was like, ooh, this could be it for Howie. I mean, Howie has to really show something here. And he hit from downtown on that. He really got them back very quickly. And there was very little luck involved, I thought. I thought he really made a series of really strong, calculated moves.
We could argue about that when we get down into the Nick era, because I think there is a bit of luck that was involved in that 2021 offseason. However, let's start with Doug, because I actually think that this is my favorite what-if, because it is something that was very close to happening. The Eagles wanted to happen, and it's not theoretical. The Eagles offered Ben McAdoo the job. That eventually went to Doug Peterson. Jimmy Kempski has the report of they sent him the gift basket. They basically thought that they were going to get Ben McAdoo. If Ben McAdoo is hired in 2016, what happens in that era? Is he? They're still drafting Carson Wentz. I think you would expect they probably still have Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator. Does a Ben McAdoo led team and offense make waves, or does it fizzle?
I don't see how that would have. I think they dodged a bullet. What did McAdoo do with the Giants?
He brought them to the playoffs, and then they went downhill thereafter. My interpretation on the McAdoo thing, I'm not disputing that they wanted him. I think the Eagles were more of a leverage play for McAdoo. I think that the idea all along was for him to be the Giants coach, and that the Eagles were kind of used to hasten that. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I think there was...
But they were willing. They wanted him.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things where like you realize after the fact you were just a negotiating chip, right? So because like if a guy wants to take a job, if he wanted the Eagles job, he would have taken the Eagles job, right? I actually think that Adam Gase was someone that they were really interested in, and Adam Gase specifically chose like he wanted to be in Miami, right? But to the point, I asked Jason Kelce this. That sounds like a flex. I'm not. I asked Jason Kelce this a year and a half ago. I was doing a story on Eagles coaches, and basically I was trying to ask the chicken or the egg. Like, is it the organization that makes the coach have success, or is it the coach that makes the organization successful? And Kelsey's point was like there's an infrastructure in place in Philadelphia. It's not a coincidence that they've had successful coaches. And look, it might not be a coincidence that the Giants have cycled through all these coaches as well. So I think that McAdoo very well might have had more success here in Philly. I don't know if
I think he absolutely would have had more success here than he had in New York. But I also you couldn't possibly say that he would have led them to the Super Bowl. Yeah.
No, but like was Doug this? No, McAdoo's personality and Doug's personality was different. I think in McAdoo, and some of it might be narrative based, but I think they kind of viewed like almost an Andy Reid type. Former quarterbacks coach with the Packers but clearly, and he tried to carry himself a certain way. I think Doug was the right coach at the right time for the Eagles.
Yes.
I think that there were certain personality things with McAdoo that would not have worked out well in Philly, but that is a great sliding doors. I just don't think, I think they would have been left at the altar no matter what by McAdoo. And I think that the Eagles' interest was McAdoo getting John Mara to act swifter in offering him the job.
And I don't know, you said they'd probably still have Jim Schwartz, and I'll take your word for that. But I do know that one of the things with Doug was that Doug had only worked for Andy in the NFL.
Yep.
And he didn't have a great Rolodex of assistant coaches, and Howie hired most of that staff, out of his basket.
I say that because McAdoo had been the interim at the very end of that season with the Giants, right? And so Spags was his defensive coordinator. He kept Spags.
Right.
I'm not so sure that he would have been.
But do they keep Stoutland? Do they do this? Yeah. Do they do that? I don't know.
I think there's a good chance. I think McAdoo would have done better in Philadelphia, but I think there's a good chance that it leads to another full teardown of the organization and maybe like a new general manager as well.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. What else you got for the Doug era?
So for the Doug era here, we spoke about Alshon. I'm curious. There's a lot of sliding door scenarios here.
Super Bowl season, I think, is a good. Like, if Carson never tears his ACL,
okay.
Do you think they still win the Super Bowl?
I was going to go after that, but let's stick to the Super Bowl season. Okay.
I do.
Yeah. You do.
Wentz was tremendous, and that offense was tremendous with Wentz. I just think they were the same team. I know Foles had a game for the ages. I'm not sure that Wentz couldn't have had a game for the ages in the same situation. That was not a good New England defense. It wouldn't have gotten any better.
Even when Matt Patricia is the coordinator?
Yeah. I will stand up for the 2017 version of Carson Wentz.
I agree.
There was nothing wrong with that guy. He could certainly win a Super Bowl. Would he have? I mean, there's no way to really know.
Of course.
There were so many plays in that Super Bowl that were just, Chris Collinsworth kept insisting that the Eagles weren't scoring touchdowns when they were,
Right. I think they were the best team in football with Carson Wentz.
Right.
Water gun to my foot, I would guess they probably don't win the Super Bowl just because so many different things have to happen. That game was so crazy. If Carson's a little bit different, I think maybe there was something to the personality of the defense, feeling a little bit more umbrage after everybody running them out when Carson Wentz gets hurt. Malcolm Jenkins sort of takes over. You've written the book about it, Zach. I just, that the Super Bowl game itself was such a thin margin that, I can't say that they definitely would have won.
Yeah, I think with Carson, I'm with Les. With Carson, they were the best team in football.
I agree with that.
And so, the best team doesn't always win.
Yeah,
I get that. If I can build on that, I'm curious what your perspectives on that. What if after that Super Bowl, they say, Nick Foles
Yeah.
just won Super Bowl MVP. Like, Carson, we love you, but we can't turn our back on the guy who won the Super Bowl MVP. You have extraordinary value in this league right now. We're going to trade you, Carson, okay? Because Nick Foles is our guy. Like, we've won the Super Bowl with him. He has this magic. We believe that we have this whole thing. You don't lose your job because of injury, but he just won the Super Bowl, right? Does the clock strike midnight on Nick pretty quickly and the Eagles turn back to a mediocre team? Do they get such a significant draft haul for Carson Wentz that now they're not just kind of doubling down on all these old guys and
that's interesting.
And like, you know, they have more first and second round picks.
That's an aspect of it I had not considered. I mean, if you just limit it to, okay, Nick Foles is the quarterback instead of Carson. Nick had chances in 2 different cities to be, actually 3 if you count his first time around in Philly, to be a franchise quarterback. And as amazing and wonderful as he could be in short stretches, he proved conclusively over the years that he was not a franchise quarterback. He kept proving it over and over again. The magic would go away.
Sure.
The magic went away. In fact, he ended up starting the
different
2018 season
Yeah.
as the Eagles quarterback, and people couldn't wait for Carson to get back in there because Nick wasn't good.
Yeah, fair.
You know, but the haul, that is a big, the haul they would have gotten for trading Carson at that point, that's really interesting. That might have made a difference.
I mean, if you look at the draft the following year, Baker Mayfield goes number 1, Sam Darnold goes number 3, Josh Allen goes number 7, Josh Rosen goes number 10. Like, are these teams saying you have a 25-year-old who was on the verge of being the MVP?
I think teams would have lined up outside your door for that. Jesus, I mean, but I also didn't think there was ever any chance that was going to happen.
I don't think so either. Yeah, that's much more of a, I think, retrospective. Like they could have done this. I don't think they were ever considered
in the moment. No, but I really
what about the following year though?
But they felt warm and fuzzy enough to keep Nick around for the next season. They could have traded Nick at that point and gotten assets. I think keeping Nick around for the next season turned out to be a very counterproductive move because Carson never felt comfortable in that situation. And it started, although the real reason the Eagles weren't good in 2018 and 2019 and 2020 was that they let the talent level around Carson go to hell, by drafting.
Although the Eagles might come on and say for 2020, what if COVID never happens? And then all of a sudden,
it afflicted the Eagles more than anybody else. But can I ask you guys one thing from that COVID year?
Yeah.
What if Justin Jefferson was the pick over Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing.
Which was the headline on today's show. Yep.
That might have, truth be told, that might have done more to get Doug fired than anything else.
Oh, you mean the pick?
Yeah.
I mean,
because that's the story, right? That the coaches wanted,
and that's why this one is
Jalen Reagor.
I also think, I don't think they were ever going to take. I don't even think that was a discussion. I think they believed that Justin Jefferson was a slot only player, and they needed a guy on the outside, and that was going to be Jalen Reagor. And so it would have been great if they had drafted Justin Jefferson, and I think if they do, Doug doesn't get fired. I think the offense is much better. Maybe eventually he gets fired in 2021, but that saves the team. They
don't take Devontae.
Obviously, they don't take Devontae. They don't get AJ Brown.
Yeah.
I think they probably don't win the Super Bowl. However, I just don't think that they were ever going to draft Justin Jefferson over Jalen Reagor.
Huh? I just can't. I know that's what they thought, but I can't imagine thinking that, having seen.
It was such short. So I said this at the time, and I feel strongly about this. They looked at their roster, and they said, "We're going to play 12 personnel with Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. We have these 2 great tight ends. We don't need, when we're in 11 personnel, Greg Ward was our leading receiver last year. It's ridiculous to make a decision based on Greg Ward.
Right. This is a big picture conversation.
It's ridiculous to make a decision on the 2 tight ends because you're not going to keep 2 tight ends.
And the myopia of using a first-round pick on what fits a specific moment in time,
exactly,
as opposed to taking the best player.
But they thought they were like on the doorstep. And you
Yeah.
make these decisions when you're on the doorstep. Like, this team just needs this. I do think that year they were interested in trading up for CeeDee Lamb because they thought CeeDee Lamb could play on the outside. But Justin Jefferson, Bo's right. I think the coaches had determined that Justin Jefferson was a slot, and they needed a speedy outside receiver.
And what do you think if they don't make the Ryan Bates for Eli Harold trade?
well, that would have set everything back. That would have set everything back. But in that draft, and again, we don't need. I know we need to get to Nick.
Yeah.
But I think that if
We're going long today.
Yeah, if they decided to take Jeremy Chin, that like let's not mess with Carson Wentz. We like Jalen Hurts as a prospect, but we see Carson has a fragile psyche.
I don't think they saw that.
It's a bad job by them.
Well, I think that they thought, and they said this publicly, but I think they thought this privately. Like, we traded Nick Foles. We gave you a franchise contract. What more do you need to see from us? Like, we've showed you our love. You know, so. But if they did not take Jalen, then I don't think they are moving on from Carson because they don't have that plan B in place.
Yeah. But also then Carson is probably not asking to be moved
That's
on
true
from,
as well.
Right?
Yeah.
The last one from that era, very quickly. If Josh McDaniels doesn't back out of the Colts job and Frank Reich doesn't leave, does that change the arc of the next couple of years for the Eagles? I don't think it changes too much.
Yeah, I think Frank gets a job the following year, probably.
And I also think personnel became a problem. You know, wide receivers and, you know, I just don't think they had. I don't think the problem was so much the offensive coordinator.
Although I do think that Mike Rowe is an outstanding wide receivers coach.
Yeah.
And we can overstate the value of a position coach in a player's development. But I think that maybe if Mike Rowe remains the wide receivers coach, developmentally that position's not as much of a mess as it turned out. Because they go to your boy Gunter Brewer. And things were, and then they go to Carson
Things
Walsh.
get a little freaky.
Yeah, things go to Carson. They didn't have stability at that position, and maybe wide receiver looks different.
But I think you're probably right. If things go well, then Frank Reich is gone a year later anyway, right?
Exactly.
Right. Good point.
All right. Last era here. Let's talk Nick Sirianni. And to me, we talk about the things that like we know the Eagles wanted to do. The 2022 offseason, when eventually they trade for A.J. Brown, they enter that offseason. They would have liked to trade for Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson.
Yep.
And they would have liked to sign Allen Robinson.
Ooh.
And like you talk about like things that turned into a disaster. All three of those players changing teams turned into like absolute busts. And so if that was Howie Roseman's big lever pull that offseason, let's say he trades for Russell Wilson and signs Allen Robinson, I think things have blown up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what they wanted.
Yeah. They wanted one of those quarterbacks.
Like, that's the luck.
They wanted one of those quarterbacks. Even when they couldn't get one of those quarterbacks, like you said, they wanted Calvin Ridley or Allen Robinson, right? Like, A.J. Brown was not plan A going into the offseason. But certainly going into that year with Jalen Hurts was now, again, some of it might be revisionist history. I think Jeffrey believed in Jalen maybe more than more than Howie might have.
You're probably right.
You know, Nick didn't take this job to coach Jalen Hurts, right? But you're absolutely right. Yeah, I don't think, you know, I mean, Russell Wilson, some things you can say are environmental. Russell Wilson had Nathaniel Hackett and Sean Payton and did not play well with either one of them.
I think you're maybe
overstating
Nathaniel.
I just mean like he's had two different coaches, you know. Deshaun Watson, I think Kevin Stefanski's a high level coach. He's been mediocre. He was a year removed from football at that point. So
I would have never. I was astounded that they really wanted Deshaun Watson because that doesn't fit Jeffrey's.
I didn't think so either, but everything tells us that they did. Yeah.
I would not have.
And maybe
even
Deshaun
been
Watson
close
was
to
not
that.
interested because he didn't want to displace
Jalen Hurts,
right?
Yes.
Right. But if Russell Wilson wanted to be here, he would have been here.
Yeah.
I think they just wanted a top quarterback, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Russell Wilson more so. I think Russell Wilson was the guy that they really hoped, and Russell Wilson was not interested in coming to Philly.
What else do you have on the Nick
So there's a few things with Nick here. Not trading Carson was one thing we can get into, but I'm curious too. And again, Bo's gonna laugh when I bring this up. But what if Jonathan Gannon stays? What if
I think there are two paths here.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the two paths is what if Jonathan Gannon notifies them earlier, right? And then Vic Fangio is the defensive coordinator last year, as opposed to Sean Desai. That's one thing we can talk about.
That's a huge.
And then what if Jonathan Gannon, he said on the field after the game, Philly, I'm staying here, right? You're stuck with me. What if Jonathan Gannon comes back? How's last year different? A, with Vic Fangio, and B, with Jonathan Gannon?
What do you think, Les?
Well, I think that helps a great deal. Either one of those things helps a great deal. Now, they did get into in the secondary. It's always a disaster when you've got, okay, this week we're starting this guy that we found on the street 3 weeks ago. They did get into a little bit of that in the secondary. That was going to be a problem no matter who the coordinator. If you're going to have those kinds of injuries,
sure,
the coordinator isn't going to go out there and cover anybody. But it was such chaos defensively. I just think it would have had to have been better. I think the whole vibe would have been better. Maybe the off-season moves would have been different.
I think that's a big one too. I think Vic has clout last offseason in terms of how they compose that roster. And I think
or if Gannon had stayed, he would have had clout.
Certainly he would have had clout. There also would have been continuity.
What difference do you think? What do you think they would have done differently personnel-wise?
Safety linebacker.
Yes.
I think the approach would have been different. I think we've seen that this offseason.
I think a linebacker at least. They would have signed a guy. Maybe.
Sure. Yeah.
But they didn't have a lot to work with. I don't know. Go ahead.
Look, maybe Gannon is more now. Their plan going into last offseason, by the way, was keeping C.J. Gardner-Johnson and letting James Bradbury leave.
Right.
Yep.
When they couldn't agree to a deal with C.J. Gardner-Johnson, they revisit
switched.
Bradbury. Yeah. Slay has said this. He was going to Baltimore. Right. I think Slay said Dom called him at the last minute.
Yeah.
So their secondary, their plan was for the secondary to look differently last year than it ended up looking. That said, with Gannon or with Fangio,
I'm open to the case that they might have been better with Gannon than Fangio last year because of continuity.
There's continuity there. Gannon knows the personnel, and I think the composition of the coaching staff's different. I don't think Denard Wilson leaves in that situation. So you have your secondary coach there.
If it's Gannon,
I'm saying, if Gannon comes back, they're bringing back Wilson. Denard Wilson wanted that coordinator job. They hire someone from the outside. He leaves. Now, Nick Rowles is coming back as your linebackers coach. Now you have your no, but I'm saying
no, I'm not being sarcastic.
You have your entire.
I thought that guy was a good coach.
No, but you have your entire staff back.
But I'm thinking this through.
Yeah, you have your entire staff back.
That is more different than I kind of initially.
So, there were a lot of butterfly effects to Gannon leaving that I think hurt that defense. And of course, Jonathan Gannon's a high level coach. So.
I also think though that they would have been better.
Yeah,
I don't think
they're not
winning the Super Bowl,
which
last
pains
year,
so many people in Philadelphia to hear. But yes,
yeah.
Well, I don't know that it's definitely true. I also think that just having a guy who Nick trusted would have made a difference because he's not making a panic move to fire the defensive coordinator midseason.
Well, I just think Nick's idea going into last season about not expanding the offense and just getting really good at the core things that they did well.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was a bad idea, and I think it's the sort of thing that loses you cred in the locker room. I can't say that he did lose cred, but if I were a player and I saw how that worked out, I'd be like,
well, that's sort of the question.
Does this guy know what the hell he's doing?
If they had Gannon or Fangio there last year, and the offense still,
I was about to say this,
fizzled away at the end of last season, does that put even more heat on Sirianni than he ended up having?
Yeah, and to build on that, I know this is like the nightmare scenario for some Eagles fans out there, but if they were compelled to make a coaching change, I do know in that building they thought very highly of Jonathan Gannon, right? like one of the.
I think you're being now.
No. If the defense was played at a mid to high level last year, and the offense faltered,
problem was the offense,
and the problem was the offense. Perhaps they're saying look, we have this young defensive coordinator who we think very highly of, right? We don't want him to leave one day. Maybe that's the case. Or maybe I'm going to read the comment section in 3 hours and people are going to say, Joe Mazzulla and Jonathan Gannon, Zach Berman doesn't know what he's talking about with coaches. But.
Coming out in October 2024, The Genius, the biography of Jonathan Gannon by Zach Berman.
Now you know what I'm working on late at night.
Wherever books are sold.
Yes.
All right, last one for you. Very simple. If the flag is not thrown on James Bradbury at the end of the Super Bowl,
they win.
And the Chiefs kick a field goal, they're up 38-35. The Eagles get the ball back with about 150 left. Do they go down and win the Super Bowl?
So I think they tied the game.
Yeah.
I think they go down, kick a field goal, and tie the game. Now, I should know this off the top of my head. Last year was the first year of the coin toss of the new overtime rules, right? It wasn't 2 years ago because it was a reaction to the Bills Chiefs. So then I think whoever wins the coin toss in overtime wins the game. You get the ball first, they go down and score a touchdown. But I think that the Eagles at that point, the Eagles weren't lights out on offense in the second half of that game. They punted twice, they kicked a field goal, they scored a touchdown on that preceding drive. But I think there would have been a minute and a half to go. They would have had one timeout or two timeouts.
Two
timeouts.
I feel it very much in my bones.
You think they score a touchdown? You think they go length?
I think that day, if you put the ball in Jalen Hurts' hands that day with that much time left and two timeouts, I think they win that game. I'm sorry.
I completely.
That's my.
Yeah, maybe we will never know.
We'll never know.
Yeah. So their drive chart.
I absolutely believe that they will go down to win the Super Bowl.
So here you go. So just their drive chart in the second half was
field goal, punt, touchdown.
Yeah, field goal, punt, touchdown.
Possessions.
Yeah, the problem was their defense couldn't get off the field, so the offense.
Yeah.
Just
don't tell that to Zach.
Yeah.
Don't tell that to Zach. The Genius was on the headset that day.
Right.
All right. You know what? I've in my post game notes, not of this, but of my shows, I've learned that I don't have to dignify everything with a response. So I am not going to have to dignify that with a response. But I think that I think they would have scored a field goal at least. They would have got at least overtime. Now the Chiefs would have been 4th and 8 at the 15 if there's no defensive holding there. So there's no way Andy's kicking the field goal. There's no way he's going for it.
Yes.
Yeah. So that at that point, then you got a buck for it. Yeah, you're right. You have a minute 46, two timeout.
I think
no, they would have had one timeout. They would have one timeout because they used their third timeout on the 1st and 10 play. So they would have had a minute 48 to go, one timeout.
Yeah, I think they score for sure. Yeah, I'm just making things up.
I
think what's more interesting.
The only variable to me is if they score and there's time left. Does Mahomes find a way to win it with 20 seconds left?
That's true. The one I've always thought about is if, let's say, the Chiefs score a touchdown. Let's say Bradbury doesn't hold and it becomes a touchdown and they get the ball back.
Yeah.
Do they then go down for a touchdown? And if they score, do they go for 2 to win? And that's the whole thing. I kind of think that they do go for it.
I was thinking that at the time. I remember thinking, now I forgot about that, but I remember thinking that watching the game is, geez, if they just let them score, go back. Your offense is the strength here.
And I remember asking Nick that at the combine. Would you have gone for 2 if he? And he's giving a smile like, we'll never know. But I think he would have.
Now I do think that had there not been a penalty there, and the Chiefs win the game, there's more heat on Nick's decision to punt the ball.
Had there not been a penalty, and what do you mean?
Had the Chiefs? So if the blame for losing was not on the flag, okay, and you go back, I think there's more.
You start analyzing.
You start analyzing. You say
the 4th and 2 punt.
The 4th and 2 punt,
which he, I give a lot of heat on, but I don't think that. The defense is the thing.
Well, that's true.
Think?
No, defense is the thing now, anyways. Yeah, but I'm saying, if there's no penalty, they kick a field goal, and then the Eagles don't go down and score.
Oh, and then they don't go. I see what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
If they get the ball and then
they don't score. Then I think
I feel like if that's the case, it gets narrowed into that final possession. Happened?
Sure.
Why didn't they
get a
field goal? Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good one. Okay. But certainly, Gannon's the scapegoat no matter what, right? So
to me, that was a Super Bowl that the Eagles should have won.
Performance of all time, but
to me, I think that's a Super Bowl the Eagles should have won much more than Super Bowl 39. I never really thought the Eagles were winning Super Bowl 39 in the second half. Their defense couldn't stop the Patriots. I'm not going to get into all that McNabb TO stuff, but it just I think people are fooling themselves. The Patriots were a better team that year.
I have one more. And this is actually an Andy Reid era one.
Okay.
And you're going to think this is a joke, Zach, but I want you to answer it honestly. What if Jonathan Tamari is not interested in politics?
Well, I know the answer to that. I don't know if I could say it publicly.
I think the statute of limitations has passed.
No, because I think I'm covering a different team in this city. I'll put it that way.
Oh.
I'm pretty confident I'm covering a different team in the city if that Eagles job does not open in 2012. But
okay.
I mean, when this show's over, I'll tell you.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I understand. I understand why you wouldn't answer that. But you're still covering the.
I'm in
sports.
Philadelphia. I know that. And I know I'm in Philly, and I know what I'm doing. And maybe eventually an Eagles would have opened up. I would have applied, and we'll see what would have happened.
Eagles is what you wanted.
Oh yeah. Eagles. I mean, football's the biggest show in town.
It is.
And I mean, not to make this about, but like when I left my first job covering college sports because I specifically wanted to cover the NFL. And I remember at the time there were people saying, "Why would you leave where you were leaving?" And I said, "Because I want to cover the NFL." And everything. So like that, and then that
was
also
the guiding light.
Covering the NFL, yes.
Yeah.
And I had visions of having a family one day, and I thought football was the most conducive for having a wife and kids.
That is certainly true. It's the only beat really that's conducive to that.
So yeah, the NFL was specifically kind of what I wanted. But if that Eagles job didn't open, I was looking for a job in Philly, and so I would have been covering a different team. Is the answer?
There you go. All right. Do you have a career what if that dates back for you, Les?
I almost became the Phillies beat writer after the '93 World Series.
Wow.
Paul Hagen was covering for the Daily News then, and he was going to leave the beat and become a columnist. And somehow he backed out of that. And to tell you the truth, I had been around the Phillies a lot. I had been doing national baseball in '89 and doing some Phillies stuff in '89. I covered the game where they came back against the Pirates when they were down 10-0, and Steve Jeltz homered from both sides of the plate. I'd done a lot of Phillies, so I was there for the World Series. I was writing sidebars. That was my 93, my 11th wedding anniversary. Joe Carter, right in front of me at the Aux press box. So I was set to do that, and Paul decided that he wanted to keep the beat, and I stayed on the Flyers and ended up with the Eagles 9 years later. I liked hockey. I wanted a little bit bigger stage. Baseball beat, though, especially the way we did it back then,
relentless,
would kill you. And we were just having our second kid. And I think I'd probably be divorced now if I'm serious. That would have been a disastrous move for me.
Yeah.
Plus, the Phillies weren't good again forever. It would have been not a great time to start covering the Phillies.
But you would have had Octobers off.
I guess, yeah. But, that would not have been that was a big near miss for me.
Good one.
You have one?
I don't know. If Shield is not who they bring with the Athletic launching in 2017, I'm probably not here. I don't know what I'm doing.
You'd be successful wherever you were. I know that.
I don't know about that.
Well, you spent some time out of sports, right?
I did, yeah. I'd probably still not be in the business.
Yeah.
That sounds dreadful.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, I'm joking. No, you'd be successful wherever you were. I know that.
I don't know that. But thank you.
I think so, yes.
That's nice of you to say. All right. Well, that'll do it for a fun theoretical edition of the PHLY Eagles podcast. Thank you, Les, for joining us. Back tomorrow, I believe we're having E.J. Smith coming in with us. We got to actually double check to make sure that we're still doing that, but I think that EJ's a man of his word. That'll do it for this episode. Thanks to everybody else. Let us know if you have other what ifs you think we should have talked about. Maybe we'll bat them around later in the week. For Les and Julia and Zach, I'm Bo. We thank you for listening. Back tomorrow at noon. And as always, we love you.
We all silly like the mayor.